Okay, good morning everyone. This is Teacher Lovey. So our topic today is about completing and testing the assembly, lesson 4. If all the internal hardware are all installed in your computer, example is the CD drive, hard disk, expansion cards are already installed, we are now ready to assemble our computer or the parts of the computer, peripherals outside the computer. So, connecting peripherals of a personal computer. So, before we connect the peripherals or the cables outside the computer, make sure that they are connected to the correct locations and never force the cable to connect to the pins. Why? Because it may broken or bent. Plug in only the power supply after all the peripherals and cables are connected. So, the first one we will attach is the VGA or VGA cable. So, note, monitors use a variety of standards to connect to PCs, but the main ones are VGA, DVI, and HDMI. So, the most popular that we connect is the VGA cable, the blue one cable, but there are other colors like blue or black. The next one is the HDMI. HDMI has, if you connect the HDMI in your laptop, then in your TV, HDMI is parang mas mata siya kaysa sa VGA because it can produce sounds. It can produce sounds if the TV has a speaker, built-in speakers, or monitors has built-in speakers or projector. So, makaka-produce na siya ng sounds. Unlike sa VGA. DVI naman is pareho siya ng function din ng VGA. Pero mas maganda yata yung graphics pag VGA. Ay, DVI kaysa sa VGA. Next is the connecting the keyboard and the mouse. So, dati, luma pa yung mga system unit, ang ginagamit nila is the PS2. The violet one is for the keyboard and the green one is for the mouse. But now it changed. So ang ginagamit na natin na cable is USB. So meron na tayong USB for keyboard and USB for the mouse. So hindi na tayo color coded. Unlike dati na PS2 connector yung ginagamit. The next one is Ethernet cable. So, ito naman is for purpose for network card. Nakakonekta yan sa network card. Pero kung may built-in naman yung motherboard ninyo, is pwede na yun. So, network cable, ayan yung nailaw. Nagfi-flicker na color yellow do sa likod ng computer nyo kung merong connection. Pag walang magfi-flicker, naka-steady lang yung ilaw. So, yan. So, meron tayong ang pinakamabilis or pinakamagandang Ethernet cable is the Cat6. Okay, so ang difference nila, syempre, mas mabilis yung internet connection. Nakaka-improve ng faster internet connection. Number 5 is plug the power cable in the power supply on the back of the computer. So, ito yung last para iwas kuryente kayo. Ito yung last na ginagawa. Ipa-plug in nyo na yung power supply sa back of the computer. So, syempre, ilalagay nyo rin yan sa AVR, ipa-plug in yung power supply sa AVR or sa UPS. So, mamaya alamin natin ano ang UPS. So, testing the system. So, for example, nagka-problema, bakit hindi pa rin nagbubukas yung computer? Kahit okay naman siya, nakakabit naman yung cable, adapters, pero hindi pa rin siya gumagana. So, these are the steps na pwede nyong gawin para maayos yung computer. The number 1 is testing the system first before installing additional expansion cards to the computer. So first is, i-test nyo muna yung computer ninyo nang wala yung adapters. Baka yun yung magkaroon ng, yun yung problema. Then, isasaksak nyo na yung adapters. So, kung gumana yung computer ng maayos, na wala yung adapter, then once na sinaksak nyo na yung adapter sa computer ninyo, then hindi gumana, ibig sabihin, alin ang may problema? Siyempre, yung adapters. Baka hindi naman siya compatible to sa motherboard or sa other components ng computer. Number 2 naman, do not apply several changes all at once to avoid confusion. Do not just click or change anything on the system without knowing the cause of the conflict. So, ibig sabihin, step by step. Hindi pwedeng restart, ang dami mong clinic, ang dami mong in-update, tapos, hindi mo na alam kung alin doon yung nakakadagdag ba ng problema or nakakasolve ka ng problem. So yun yung inaano, step by step, hindi pwedeng lahat kakalasin, lahat i-update, lahat i-uninstall. So isa-isa nyong gagawin muna para ma-solve niyo yung problem. So yun lang. The next is preparing to test the system. It is not recommended to plug the computer monitor directly to the wall outlet, rather provide a UPS or the uninterruptible power supply. So yung computer natin and a monitor is not, hindi siya nire-recommend daw na i-plug nyo sa direct sa outlet. Kasi pwedeng masira, magkaroon ng short circuit. Usually, yan yung pag biglang nagbo-brown out, tapos biglang after 5 minutes or 10 seconds, biglang bubukas. Nagkakaroon kasi ng problema sa kuryente. Yung biglang direct na dadalo yung kuryente sa mga appliances. So, doon nagkakaproblema. So, naglalagay tayo ng AVR. So, yun yung purpose ng AVR para ma-regulate niya yung kuryenteng dumadaloy. The next one is this one naman is the UPS. So UPS naman kailangan is iano naman natin. Ang UPS naman is parang nag-i-store siya nag-i-store naman siya ng kuryente. So, pag once naman na nag-brown out, is pwedeng, pwedeng, may time pa kayo mag-shutdown, may time pa kayo mag-save. Parang ewan ko kung ilang hours or minutes ang UPS. Pero dito kasi, di ko pa siya natatry actually, kasi pag nag-brown out, UPS yung gumagana, pero bigla namang bumabalik yung kuryente. So, hindi ko alam kung ilang minutes or hours siya makakasave. Next is powering up the system for the first time. So, saksak ko lang yung aking laptop. The next one is powering up the system for the first time. So, what if hindi pa rin gumagana yung system unit? So, pwede nyong gawin is pindutin ninyo check ninyo yung front panel. Ayan yung nakikita ninyo. This one is the front panel. Baka hindi naman nakasaksak yung switch on. Ito, kasi dapat nakasaksak ng maayos yung switch on sa front panel para gumana. So, may naman yun eh. Ayan power switch. Ayan. So, dapat nakasaksak siya sa front panel ng maayos. Kasi hindi ang gagana. Hindi mag-i-switch or dadalo yung kuryente. Next is, the system does not respond. Then check if the wall socket has a power or if the power cable is connected properly. Baka naman, sira na yung wall socket ninyo. So, pwedeng yun yung reason bakit hindi gumagana yung system unit. Walang source of electricity. Or, naka-off naman pala yung power supply ninyo. Ito. So, 0 is off and 1 is on. So, yun yung, so make sure na naka-on yung power supply. If everything's working properly, then the assembly of computer hardware is successful, completed. So, okay na. Gumagana na yung computer ninyo. Next is setting up the BIOS. The BIOS allows the computer to perform certain function in order to facilitate loading of operating system. It also controls the data flow between the computer operating system and the basic hardware components of the computer. So, ito yung BIOS, itsura ng BIOS. Hindi nyo siya makikita agad-agad kasi may pipindutin pa kayo every time. Pag once inopen nyo yung system unit, then may nakalagay, press F1, for example, F1 or F2 to go to the BIOS para makita ninyo to yung BIOS utility. In setting up the BIOS, the monitor, keyboard, and mouse cable must be properly connected. So, ito yun. So, dapat meron syempre kayong monitor para makita nyo yung BIOS, keyboard para ma-press ninyo para makapunta kayo sa BIOS, and the mouse. So, ito daw pwedeng delete or F11. Pero depende yan sa depende yan sa manufacturer ng motherboard ninyo. In the BIOS setup screen, a setup of menu is displayed. It may seem like an intimidating place to be, but is actually easy to use. However, for a beginner, it is advisable not to change the setting on the BIOS as this gets to the user into major trouble. So, pwede rin kasi kayo mag-change ng mga setup dyan, pero kung hindi nyo naman alam, so, yun. Tanggalin natin to. Next. Steps in setting up the BIOS on the CMOS screen. So, ito naman, usually, ginagawa ko dito sa CMOS is mag-change ng date and time. Okay, set the date, time, and date. Leave the BIOS auto-detected the peripherals. Exit the CMOS setup screen and scroll the IDE HD auto-detect screen and have the BIOS auto-detect the hard drive. Browse through the other BIOS screen and setting to make sure that the default settings are in line with the way the computer should be configured. If using the motherboard without jumper, then the CPU and the bus speed should be through the BIOS. When working with the BIOS, keep in mind that when in doubt, or if the beginner do not change anything, otherwise it may hamper the computer performance by unwittingly changing a setting that the user shouldn't have to. When satisfied with the BIOS setting, click Save and Exit and press Enter. So, ayan naman, ito yung itsura ng CMOS Setup Utility. Ito yung Advanced BIOS Features. Ano ba mga usually ginagamit ko dito? Ito naman lagi kong tinitingnan dito yung Advanced BIOS Features eh. Then, yun lang, alam ko. So, pag magkukwit kayo, ayan naman, may Escape, may F9, then F10, Save and Exit Setup. So, final checklist tayo. So, medyo madami pa. Make sure all the jumpers are set properly kasi yan yung ng flow ng electricity. Then next is check all the adapters if they are seated properly and fastened to the motherboard screw. Okay. Kasi, di ba ang mga adapters, for example, is the VGA or video card adapters is may fan sila. So, pag may gumalaw yung fan, so pwedeng matanggal yung adapter na yon. Next is check all the wires and make sure that they are connected properly. A loose plug can result a data error. So, for example, hindi nyo na lagay yung fan. Computer fan, CPU fan, ito yung pwedeng mangyari. CPU fan error. Ayan. So, hindi siya magtutuloy dun sa computer ninyo. IDE cables and power cable for both DVD and hard should be secured and properly installed. So, then another thing is depende sa inyo kung alin sa mga hard drives ninyo or DVD ninyo ang master and slave. But make sure na ang master is laging hard disk and slave naman is the DVD. The power supply must be installed properly with the screw. Siyempre naman, kuryente yan. And may fan din yan na pwedeng mag-cause ng paggalaw or pag-uga ng system unit. The hard disk drive should be installed properly with screw. Another din to kasi may platter yan, may umiikot yan. Umiikot din yung platter sa loob. So, pag hindi yan, pwedeng masira yung hard disk ninyo pag hindi yan naka-screw. The CPU should be well seated in the slot socket with the cooling fan heatsink firmly attached. The cooling fan power cable should be connected to the power supply. So, para hindi uminit yung CPU ninyo, be sure na yung heatsink is gumagana. Then, the ATX power supply should be connected to the motherboard. So, itong 20 to 24 pin natin is dapat naka-connecta. And lastly is the number 9. The connector to the power switch reset switch, power LED, HDD, LED, and speaker should be connected in the proper place as recommended by the motherboard. So, ito rin ang pinaka-importante kasi, for example, itong power switch na to, yung 6 and 8, ito po is another, paalala po, iba-iba yung front panel natin sa iba't ibang motherboard. So, depende sa motherboard ninyo. So, 6 to 8 naman is the power switch, yan yung pinaka-importante para mag-switch yung computer ninyo. Magbigay ng signal na mag-switch on yung computer ninyo. Then, LED, power LED, yan yung nagpapailaw. Hard drive activity LED, yan yung nailaw or nagbi-blink sa harap ng system unit ninyo. Then, reset switch, kung gusto nyo mag-reset. Then, plus 5 volts direct current. Okay, so yun lang. Sana may natutunan kayo sa lesson 4, kahit late na, pasensya na. So, yun lang po. Lesson 4, completing and testing the assembly. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Stop recording.